The key to getting rich and staying rich is to avoid doing stupid things. Business is an intellectual sport, and all of us tend to self-sabotage at one point or another. And that self-sabotage is largely a result of allowing one of three things to happen. At the root of all of my financial disasters, my financial mistakes, there's one of three things.
This is the Business of Advice podcast, where we help good advisors become great business owners.
Hey, everybody. Today it's a true honor to have a real thought leader, in my opinion, kind of an icon in the business industry, Keith Cunningham. He is the author, and we're going to talk a lot about this. This book, The Road Less Stupid, is one of the best business books that I've ever read. I recommend to everybody. We're going to talk a lot about that. Keith is an entrepreneur. So what I love about him is, he is the man in the arena that's actually doing it also, not just teaching people how to do it, and has over 45 years of business and investing experience. We first met at Tony Robbins' Business Mastery. I think you're probably the longest speaking person that Tony's ever had at his events. But Keith, buddy, it's good to see you again.
Great to see you, Cody. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Let's jump in. I know I kind of already highlighted your book, The Road Less Stupid, but you had this quote in there that said, I don't need to do more smart things. I just need to do fewer dumb things. And I think a lot of business leaders are always looking for this next big idea or great idea, that next home run thing. But what you advocate for a lot in the book is just making good decisions. Will you just talk about that conceptually?
Business is an intellectual sport. Business and money do not respond well to emotion, gut, and glands. In fact, if I gave you, or anybody who's listening, if I gave you the opportunity to unwind any three financial decisions you've ever made, how much money would you have right now? And most people tell me, oh my God, if I could just unwind one of my decisions, I could have double, triple, quadruple. I'd have 10x the amount of money that I have right now. So the key, if that's true, the key to getting rich and staying rich is to avoid doing stupid things. Business is an intellectual sport, and all of us tend to self-sabotage at one point or another. And that self-sabotage is largely a result of allowing one of three things to happen. At the root of all of my financial disasters, my financial mistakes, there's one of three things. Number one, excessive optimism. Number two, unexamined assumptions. And number three, ignored risk. Excessive optimism, unexamined assumptions, ignored risk. The only way I'm going to be successful sustainably in business is if I view business as an intellectual sport. The book that many of us have heard of, a lot of us have copies of, a few of us have read. The book is called Think and Grow Rich. The name of the book is not Use Your Emotions, Your Gut, and Your Glands to Grow Rich. And so I've found in my own business and with the business owners that I work with that if we'll bake in some thinking time, bake in some, so maybe this is a great way to say it. Gladiators win battles, generals win wars. And when I look at the way most people tend to approach their business, it's at a gladiator level, which means that they're going to slay all the dragons but they won't win the war because winning the war requires that you be thoughtful. It requires a plan. It requires supply chains. It requires resources. And all of that is in the thinking part, which is why I wrote the book.
Well, and I know we're going to talk more about some of the concepts in the book. You've heard me say this multiple times. You've spoke for us multiple times, but really an incredible book. And the thing I love about it is you outline, like, here's things that you should go think about as a business owner. At the end of every chapter has this thinking time and things. And I know Dave and I here have used that a lot. We both read it, compared notes, and then we'll go through it and say, like, okay, let's think about this week and some of that. So a lot of stuff we're going to hit there. Let me, though, I'm going to pivot a little bit here on you. In the beginning of the beginning stages of the pandemic last year in 2020, I think like every business leader, you're trying to figure out, okay, how to never faced this before. There's not necessarily a playbook for this. But then I listened to an interview that you did with Gary Keller on his podcast, and you outlined to me what became our playbook for how we were going to handle. And I shared this. I sent it around to our team here, and I said, we need to share this with every advisor we work with. They should listen to this podcast. And then one of them said, well, it would be helpful, Cody, if you said, like, what are the key takeaways that you had for the podcast we can coach around that. So I'm going to share these, and I'd like you to talk through maybe I'll share one and have you just give a little more detail around each one of them if that works for you. But there were 4 really big takeaways that I had from that we implemented into our business. Is that good if I just share one of these and then have you? Okay. So the first one you said, and I think I'll tell you what we did is we were very thoughtful in how we were going to spend money. We did a hiring freeze. We froze like salary adjustments, and we were very honest and candid with our employees about why we were doing it. Now, coming out of it, I think there's going to be some things we can adjust that will be good. But the first big takeaway I had was you said current expenses consume future oxygen. So would you talk about kind of what that means and what a business owner needs to be thinking about there?
So there's only one way to go broke, and that is to run out of cash. You can have negative profits for years, and as long as you don't run out of cash, the business can stay open. What consumes cash in a business are the expenses, and oftentimes, when businesses get into trouble, the lever they reach for is the growth lever, because the assumption is if I was just a little bigger, it would solve my profit or my cash problems. And that thinking is counter to every single business that you've ever read about in the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, Forbes, Fortune, Business Week. There's not one example of a company that got into trouble and the first thing they did is try to grow. When big companies get into trouble, the first thing they do is shrink. Always. That's true 100% of the time. And yet for most of us that are smaller and don't have that kind of experience, we don't focus, historically, have not focused as much on controlling the expenses, because to the extent that I have a limited amount of oxygen and I use that oxygen today, then I'm not on current expenses, then I'm not going to have that oxygen tomorrow. There's a great story that all of us heard about. I've forgotten when it was. It was several years ago, but it's a story of a Thailand soccer team that decided to explore a bunch of caves in Thailand. These were young boys, probably 14, 15 years old on this soccer team, and their soccer coach went with them to explore the caves. And on the way to the caves, they stopped off at a 7-Eleven or something, and they picked up, 4 peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, whatever it was. So they get into the caves, and there's a huge rainstorm, and now the caves, the entrance to the caves is blocked with water. And so it became a huge international effort to save these young boys that were trapped in these caves. And literally, there was scuba divers and police and all, huge and international. After 15 days, they discovered they got to the boys and they got them out. And when they got the boys out, now there were, I think, 13, 14 of these boys. When they got them out, there was still 2 peanut butter and jelly sandwiches left. In other words, they didn't know how long the bad times were going to last, and so they had to conserve their oxygen, their peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, and when they were discovered after 15 or 16 days, they still had food left. Mm-hmm. Well, that when we're in an economic situation like what we were in a year ago, and by the way, now that it's happened, it's going to happen again.
Yep.
Now that there's been such a thing as a lockdown, which there never was before, but now that it's happened, this will be a recurring theme. And there's another story I could tell you about that, but this will be a recurring theme. And so the key is, we need, as business owners, we need to be thoughtful about how much of our oxygen are we consuming for today's livelihood, and how much of that oxygen do we need to preserve, particularly when we don't know how long the crisis is going to last.
Well, and Keith, you said there, so one of my third point that I sent, and so I'll jump ahead to this one because I think it's so, if there's a lesson that I've seen a lot of people learn from this, and this was my third point, you said that the greatest risk going forward is the protocol that we use for this quarantine becomes how we handle all future situations. So, think about, from a business owner standpoint, if they decide they're going to shut down the economy for 60 or 90 days in the future to handle these situations, how do you build a machine that can constantly survive those types of things? And I think if there's one thing that I saw, as we started talking to our advisors, we're like, hey, the one big controllable a lot of you have is marketing, marketing expenses, that you could cut some of that back and start really doing a good job of doing something that's really cheap, which is picking up the phone and calling people. And I'll tell you what was interesting about that, but it's what I'd love you to talk about is just like, hey, lessons you're seeing people learn is like, people all of a sudden realize like, hey, by picking up the phone and calling people, it didn't cost us anything. And we generated a lot of business. A lot of people were worried. Prospective clients that maybe they missed on in the past that they've continued to drip on were coming in and wanting to sit down and talk to them. So any big lessons or takeaways you have from that of like, okay, if this becomes a protocol for how things are handled in the future, what do you've got to make sure that you do in your business to survive that?
I think one of the most common mistakes that business owners make, particularly business owners that don't have a board, one of the most common mistakes is they tend to think in terms only of offense. There's rarely the thinking about defense and safety nets and dry powder. And yet, when you look at who wins most Super Bowls, the last one is a great example. You got the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and the Kansas City Chiefs, and the team with the best defense beat the team with the best offense. You look at the last NBA Finals, Milwaukee Bucks, Phoenix Suns. The team with the best defense beat the team with the best offense. In fact, if you go back for the last 30 years, in Super Bowls and NBA Finals, 95% of the time, you'll find the team with the best defense wins the game over and over and over again. So the idea is this. If you live on the south coast of Florida and you have a house that cannot withstand a hurricane, it's only a matter of time before you have no house, because the hurricane eventually will happen. And we live in an economy and in a society in which there's a new kind of hurricane that we've never seen before, which is, okay, there's a health pandemic. Regardless of your politics, the world gets shut down for a period of time. I can't tell you the number of businesses that I work with who have what I call the miracle of the COVID. Their business is doing substantially better today than it was a year or 18 months ago, pre-pandemic, and that's largely a result of the internal changes, the structure they've made, the infrastructure that they've changed internally. They've tightened their belts. They are more thoughtful on how they spend money. They're picking up the phone for a change instead of relying on Facebook and all that kind of stuff. And all of a sudden, their financial results are actually better. Now, this isn't true for everybody.
Sure.
But it's true for a lot of people. And so my thought is real simple. If I was going to put it on a bumper sticker, I'd say how you run your business during the good times dictates how well you survive the bad times.
That's good.
And what we ought to have is we ought to have a defense to go along with our offense so that we have more than just one lever in our cockpit when the bad times happen. We know they're going to happen again. The dam has been broken. We'll have future lockdowns or future crises, and what we need to build is a house that can withstand a hurricane.
That was good. Now everyone can see why I wanted you on here. You're so good with these great lessons and then a great way to understand them. Okay, let me hit you with another one that I shared with our team is you posed the question, how many of your current problems would go away tomorrow if every player on your team was an A player? And what you said, the other note I made is a crisis. And so some people may not have followed this advice. So the reason I'm asking these is they apply great during a crisis, but candidly, if you didn't apply these during the crisis, we're still not completely out of it, right? I mean, so there's still some things that you can do here. But you said a crisis gives you the opportunity to cut. You for sure want to cut the fat. That's never going to hurt you. You can cut a little muscle, which will slow your recovery, but never cut to the bone because that creates permanent damage. And you said the bone is the people on your team that are necessary to restart the engine. So that's maybe just, there's a whole direction you can go there with A players and hiring and having the right people on the team. But I'll just kind of toss that out and let you talk a little bit about why that was so important.
It's a lesson that I had to learn the hard way when I hit a major financial bump 35 years ago. And the lesson that I learned is the tougher the times, the better the people I need. When I got a wind at my back, I can sail along pretty good, even if I've got mediocre people. But if I hit bad times, if I hit turbulence, I need great people around me to work through the problems. Great people are people that I refer to as A players. A players have a couple of common characteristics. Number one, they have a high internal emotional need to succeed. A high internal emotional need to succeed. In other words, you don't have to beg them to do their job. I tell people all the time that work for me, look, you don't have to beg me for your paycheck. Why in the world do I have to beg you to do your job? For crying out loud, here it is. Here's the job. Here's the outcomes. Go do it. A players love to be measured. They love it. It's report card day is the favorite day of every A student that you went to high school with, or junior high, or college. I still remember some of them. They made A's every semester in every single course. A players love to be measured. A players need a scoreboard. They got to be able to see what the score is, and they love to win. So if you have A players on your team, meaning they have a high internal emotional need to succeed, they're good at their job, they produce results, they raise their hand and ask for coaching. I mean, you have an A player when you got a room full of people who are saying, what else can I do? What else can I learn? What could I be doing better? And B and C players, they hunker and they avert their eyes and they hope you don't call on them. But my experience is if all of us had A players and only A players on our team, the bulk of our problems that we currently have would disappear. Now we'd have other problems, but we wouldn't have the problems we currently got if we just could top grade our team. And there's a whole skill set around doing that, and it's another part of something I teach at a different place.
Keith, one of the things that I see business owners, entrepreneurs, leaders struggle with is this, right? So they know, I mean, every single time I ask this question in a room full of them, how many of you have a person on your team you need to let go? Like every hand goes up pretty much, but then they won't do it. Any just quick advice, or so if someone listens to this and they're like, yeah, I know I've got, those C players, like how do you handle that? Just any quick advice or words of wisdom?
Every failure of leadership at its root is a lack of courage. Courage to say what needs to be said, a courage to decide what needs to be decided, the courage to listen, the courage to have the hard conversations. And the truth is that my experience is that most leaders are optimizing for being liked. And as a leader, that's not my job. As a leader, my job is to be respected, not liked. And so as a leader, I'm gonna say the hard things. I'm gonna make the hard decisions, not because I want people to hate me. It's because I care about the job that I've given myself. I've given myself the job as CEO. The people that you work with, they're the founders of the company. They're also the CEOs of the company, the leadership team. So as a founder, you hired you to be the CEO. And if you're going to be the CEO of the business, then fine, do your job. And part of your job is figuring out who needs to be on the team and helping the people who don't belong on your team, supporting them and finding someplace else that they can be successful. I think part of the problem is people don't have the words. So let me give you the words on how to do this.
Perfect.
I will say to a B player or a C player when it's time for them to move on, I'll say this. Every person on the planet has the exact same goal for the day when they wake up in the morning. Every single person. Everybody wants today to be successful. Nobody wakes up in the morning and says, today's the day that I want to be unsuccessful. The problem that we have is that this is not a company where you can be successful. you're a good person, but you can't be successful here. And so what I want to do is support you in finding someplace else that you can work where you can be successful, because it's not going to be here. So let's start a path. Let's build a path that gets you from where you are, which is unsuccessful, into a new opportunity with a new company where you can be successful. And I'll support you in making that transition, just like I expect you to support me in making the transition of whoever we bring in to fill your shoes, you helping me with that transition. So it's real simple. It doesn't have to be ugly. It doesn't have to be angry. It doesn't have to. Now, sometimes it has to be ugly, but more often than not, it's just a matter of, let me help you go do something where you can be successful with your life.
You know, when people make that decision also, every single person who has ever gotten rid of someone they knew they should have gotten rid of, like, they've never once regretted it, right? I've never talked to someone who's like, man, you know, I wish I wouldn't have got rid of that C player. So it's one of those things that once they do it, you know, it's just a huge relief. And not only on the CEO or the business owner, the entire team, right? It's not that your team doesn't also recognize, and I think that's maybe one thing I'd just ask you, like, what type of impact does that have culturally on your other A players if you're not holding a B or C player accountable?
Well, I mean, shoot, it changes everything, because now your team will, I've heard this hundreds of times. Keith, what took you so long? Why were you babying this thing? And my God, I mean, we thought that you had embraced a lower standard as a result of you keeping this B or C player on the payroll. And we're glad to see you haven't lowered your standard. It reinvigorates the team.
Yeah.
Because the team is now saying, oh, good, we don't have dead weight or an anchor we're trying to lug around with us. Let's pick up speed. The momentum changes. People's level of engagement changes. It's all positive.
I think Reed Hastings talks about this in Netflix, right? When they had to lay off like half the company and got rid of the average performers, and the business actually took off because the A players that were left were excited and invigorated and stepped up in that absence. So, okay, final point from this, and we'll jump into some other stuff. But and I should say, for anyone who's listening, go back and find it. It was Gary Keller. I don't remember the name of his podcast, but I think it's Think Like a CEO or something like that. But it was just a great interview between those two. The final big point I shared with our team, that have shared with our advisors, is there's 3 audits that you should do on your business: your expenses, your processes, and your capacity. Maybe just high level talk through like what type of audit and what you're looking for in those 3 categories.
So expenses, I'm trying to find places where money is being spent that doesn't support the only 2 reasons to spend money. I don't care what business you have. I don't care how big your business is. There's only 2 reasons to spend money. One is to keep the customers you got, and the second is to get new customers. If you're spending money on anything else, now it becomes a candidate for getting reduced or eliminated out of your cost structure. My experience is that people's cost structures tend to bloat over time because the focus is primarily on growth and not controlling the costs. So an audit of what are the costs that we're incurring, and do I need this cost in order to support keeping the customers I got or getting new ones? So that's audit number 1. Audit number 2 is the how we do stuff. are there some inefficiencies or redundancies, or is there a more elegant or fluid way for something to get done? Are we handling a piece of paper 6 times and it only needs to be 3? Are we prioritizing and measuring not only the outcomes, but how we produce those outcomes? And so that's another opportunity to audit. The third opportunity, which is particularly true in bad times, is excess capacity. Excess capacity costs money. And so during difficult times, to the extent that you're lugging around an extra 20 pounds of barbell and you're trying to tread water, that extra 20 pounds of barbell will actually cause you to drown sooner than you needed to. So let's look for the places where we've got some capacity in a down or a negative market, particularly when we don't have clarity or optics on how long it's going to last. Lugging around excess capacity consumes future oxygen. Most businesses I know are not operating at capacity right now. They've got a little bit built in for what they hope is a little bit more growth.
Yep.
And if what we were thinking during a down or a negative market is, where's that excess capacity and where can it be eliminated? That then produces more oxygen for the future, gives me a bigger safety net, more dry powder, which is what I need during a bad time. Here's the problem, Cody, when you boil it down, here's the problem. A house that can withstand a hurricane is indistinguishable from a house that cannot withstand a hurricane until after the hurricane. So if you just saw 2 houses in Miami, you couldn't really tell which one of them is built to withstand a hurricane. We're the architects of our houses, of our businesses. Let's build one that's got the ability to withstand a hurricane. I'm talking about a Cat 5 hurricane, because starting over is brutal. And all we need to avoid starting over is a little bit of safety net, a little bit of reinforcing, a little bit of seat belt. We just need a little. And then all of a sudden we have the ability to withstand a hurricane. I love this. I love this thought, and this will be how I end this. Not all progress can be measured by ground gained. Sometimes progress is measured by losses avoided.
That's good. So it was, like I said, it was the most powerful thing I listened through that whole pandemic as a business owner, trying to make smart decisions, but then also coach and guide the advisors that we work with. So I appreciate you sharing that. It's funny, I've seen you 3 or 4 times in person, had you speak for our advisors, read all your books, and still have like eight notes I'm taking away from this that I'm going to go work on. So I appreciate that. Let me ask a transition question a little bit. One of the comments you made earlier, because you have helped a lot of our advisors, worked with a lot of them. You said they're the founder, but they've hired themselves as the CEO. And I think that's one of the things we talk about all the time is like, it's not enough to be a good advisor. You have to be a great business owner, right? If you're going to grow and scale that company. So almost everyone we work with is the CEO of their firm. And one of the things that you talk about is there's 4 responsibilities that a CEO has. The organization chart, right? So who's there, the culture, the strategy, and how you allocate resources. So I know I just hit 4 of those, but are there some important questions that you think the CEO, business owner, founder needs to think about in each of those 4 categories?
Yeah, yes. I think I'm going to take one of those, the strategy. and I'm going to expand on that and give it some more mass. One of our jobs as CEOs is to understand the obstacle that's in the way. We have clarity about where we are. Most of us have clarity about what we want. We're really good at the vision of what we want. And there's a gap between where we are and what we want. And what most people do, Cody, is they describe that gap as the problem. And that gap is not the problem. The difference between where you are and what you want is the symptom. It's the gap, the obstacle that's preventing you from moving from where you are to what you want is the problem. So the problem is the obstacle in the way. Marcus Aurelius, brilliant Roman general, emperor, 2,500 years ago said, what's in the way is the way. That is simply brilliant. The obstacle in the way is the way. And so one of the hardest jobs that I have as a CEO is identifying what's the true obstacle that's preventing my forward progress to move closer and closer to what I want, to what my vision is. Understanding that obstacle is the key to designing the strategy. So I'm going to augment the list of things that can't be delegated. Certainly you can't delegate the org chart. That's who's on the team. You can't delegate the culture. You need to set priorities because that tells you how you're going to allocate resources. And certainly you need a strategy, but the strategy is going to be dependent on the obstacle that you found. So a great example would be Herb Keller, who was the founder of Southwest Airlines. And on a napkin, before he ever bought a plane, he wrote down, a plane on the ground makes no money. And the entire strategy of Southwest Airlines is built around that one simple thought, which is why there's not assigned seating. It's why they don't serve food. It's why all their planes are exactly the same. It's why they had to get really good at baggage handling. It turns out to make a lot of money in the airline industry, what you got to do is get really good at baggage handling so that you can get people on and off the plane quicker, so that your turnaround time is quicker, so you keep the plane in the air, because a plane on the ground makes no money. So the obstacle that was in the way is the plane on the ground. He did a great job of identifying the obstacle. Now he has to build a strategy to help overcome that obstacle. I think what leaders typically do is they become enamored either with the vision that they have or some strategy that they've created. And the key is can we identify the obstacle that's in the way so that we have a strategy that helps us overcome that obstacle? What's in the way is the way. And if we as leaders could understand this is the hardest thing in the world to do. Of all my thinking time, all the stuff I think about when I sit down to do that work, more often than not, the topic is, what's the real problem? Do we have time for a quick exercise, Cody? Can I do something really quick?
Absolutely.
All right. So if you're listening to this on your piece of paper, I want you to write down one of your three biggest problems that you currently have in your business. Just write it down. One of the three biggest problems you currently have, whatever it is. All right, good. That's enough. Exercise is over. Whatever it is you just wrote down is not the problem. It's the symptom. If you wrote down, I don't have enough customers. If you wrote down, I don't have enough leads. If you wrote down, I don't have enough sales. If you wrote down, I've got a weak team. Whatever it is, if you wrote down, I don't have enough profits. Whatever you wrote down is a symptom of something else. What you wrote down, what we all do, when I ask, write down a problem, what we all write down is the symptom that's the gap between where we are and what we want. Don't have enough sales, don't have enough customers, don't have a big enough funnel, don't have a marketing machine that will give me enough leads so that I can get more AUM. Whatever it is, it's not the problem, it's the symptom. And in order to figure out what the problem actually is, requires some serious thinking.
That's a good transition. Before I transition to this next question, which is about thinking time, I just had this. It's not epiphany is probably the wrong way to describe it, but when you were talking about Southwest and Herb recognized an airplane on the ground makes no money. When I think about like our top 4 or 5 advisors that are now building these big organizations, they don't even meet with people anymore, right? They're the CEO. They have advisors that are working for them. What at least the top 3 or 4 I can think of, what they've realized is that one of their advisors that's not sitting in front of clients is not making money, right? That the only way as an advisor that you make money is sitting in front of clients or prospective clients. And they've done a really good job of removing every other thing from that advisor's table to where all they do is they sit in front of prospective clients or clients all day long. Everything else, paperwork, the financial planning, all those, the marketing, all that's removed, and they make sure that, they're, for lack of a better term, the people that generate revenue are sitting in front of revenue generating opportunities all day long. And so I think every advisor, if you hear that and think about it in the sense of solves a lot of problems there. But so let me transition. Our number one advisors for the last few years are big fans of yours. And one of the things that they do really well is every single morning they have 90 minutes together. So they're brothers, 90 minutes where they sit and think, they read, and then they come together for the last 30 minutes and they share what did you think about and what did you read and learn today? What did you think about? I know for a lot of business owners, they tend to run from fire to fire, task to task, but you've said, and I've seen this, that taking time to think about your business, I think Warren Buffett, right? He reads like 6 hours a day or something like that and thinks about it, is the most important thing that you can do. What advice or how would you tell someone who is in that mode of the craziness of the business to truly step back and schedule that time to think about the business? And then, and I know there's a ton in the book, so maybe that's the easiest way, but just any advice you have around like what to think about and what type of questions you should be asking.
So thinking time is a skill that I learned 35 years ago from probably the smartest businessman I've ever met. He set aside time to think on a regular basis, and the key to an effective thinking time is to start with a really good question. So you can't start with a blank piece of paper and say, I'm going to think. If you do that, you'll wind up taking a nap. What you want is a very powerful question. And the question might be something like, how would I run my business if 100% of my future growth was by referral only? That's a hell of a question.
Yep.
A question might be, how would I need to run my business so that customers would say I'd have to be crazy to go someplace else? A question might be, who do I need on my team? What outcomes do they need to produce in order for me to get to my target at December 31st, 2023, whatever it is.
Yeah.
It's getting a meaty question, and then once you have the question on paper with a pen, not on the computer. The computer doesn't work because there's too many distractions. So you got to get a piece of paper, a pen. It's old school. You shut the door, you turn off the machines, the all the things that could beep. You literally ask Siri to set an alarm for 45 minutes, and then you sit quietly without moving and you write, and there's always an empty dot on the page. So I'm going to write a possibility, and then I'm going to put an empty dot, and that tells my brain there must be at least one more thing. My thinking time is usually 45 minutes. The alarm goes off at the end of 45 minutes. I look at what I've written. I get rid of the bad ideas. I find the one or two that might deserve future thinking time or might deserve, maybe it's time to execute. And now it's on my calendar. So the key, I think, for all of us as leaders is to deal in majors and minors. All of my board members deal in majors and minors. For a quarter, for the coming quarter, our board members get to have 1 or 2 majors and 2 to 3 minors. These are things they've elevated off of their to-do list, and it's now going to get calendar time. So the difference between a to-do list and a priority is that a priority shows up on your calendar. Otherwise, it's going to stay on your to-do list. So it turns out the key to be an effective CEO is managing and controlling what's on your calendar. And most of the people that are racing from fire to fire, crisis du jour, whack-a-mole, dumpster fires everywhere. Shoot, there's so many fires. Most people have so many fires they can't figure out who's got the matches, right? Who's lighting all these fires? How's this even happening? So that can only happen to somebody who's in an operator mode and they're not doing their job as a CEO. Because if you're doing your job as a CEO, yeah, there's going to be a fire here and there, but it's not fire after fire, whack-a-mole all day long. It's planning and thinking and driving results as opposed to being driven by them. And so operators tend to be highly reactionary, and as a result, get to the end of a day and they've been busy but not productive.
Yep.
And the reason they're not productive is because they're not in control of their calendar.
That's really good. And so true. You see it, when people can make that shift, it just, I hear advisors say this a lot. It's like, I can't find the time to do it. And I'm like, but the people that do find the time to do it are the ones that are the most successful, right? So I think maybe it's Tony that says, success leaves clues. And so that's a really good reminder of that. And then I was going to ask you a few kind of lightning round questions. So maybe I'll make this the final big kind of question or lesson. I've heard you talk about the kind of catastrophic business event that you had in the 80s. But one of the things that you did from that is you created this like log of lessons that you learned that is just, very authentic and you can see the kind of humility. Like it was like, no, here were all the really big lessons that we learned. Why do you think it's important for people to write down the lessons that they learn or the mistakes that they've made? And then as maybe a follow-up to that is like, how often do you go back and look at those lessons, review them? And are there any big ones that have just like stood the test of time of like, I'm never going to make that mistake again?
I think making mistakes is unavoidable. I think we all make mistakes. I want to avoid making mistakes that cause do-overs. Like what I had, I made a $100 million mistake, and it resulted in a do-over. I had to start all over again. I think smart people learn from their mistakes. I think wise people learn from the mistakes of others too. And so having made those mistakes, I wanted to make sure that I learned the lesson. I didn't want to have to repeat those lessons. And I'm aware in my own life that until I learn the lesson, I'm going to continue to make the mistakes. And that mistake was so incredibly painful, not only financially, but to my ego, to my self-worth, my relationships. That mistake destroyed a lot of stuff in my life, and it was a very difficult time. And so I think smart people, will make mistakes, but I think we should learn from them. And one of the reasons I wrote The Road Less Stupid is to allow other people to leverage off of my mistakes and know that they don't have to make the same ones I made, because bad stuff happens when you do. I think a lot of my lessons from in my log of lessons learned, which I still add to, maybe on a monthly basis, I'll get out my log of lessons learned and add one or two. I will review it probably annually when I do my annual thinking about what do I want for this next year. What am I going to prioritize for this next year? I'll generally review my log of lessons learned. My Achilles tendon is probably two things. It's I tend to like drama. I like it when things are exciting. I like it when things are fast-paced. I like it when, I'm in the unknown a little bit. And as a result, it's easy for me to take unexamined risk. It's easy for me to ignore risk. And so I've learned to slow myself down, that if I'm going to be effective and create sustainable wealth, then I need to be thoughtful and a little less impulsive, have a little less excitement, a little less drama. And it served me very, very well. My other Achilles tendon is that I can tend to spend more money than maybe I should on cool stuff. So I've got cool stuff everywhere, and I think one of the lessons that I wrote in the Road Less Stupid, it's in my log of lessons learned chapter. One of the lessons is flashy cars, flashy offices is not the same as success. Success and all the flash and glitter and glitzy, those are different things. And, certainly I like nice things, but I need to make sure that I'm not letting my ego get in the way. So I'm aware of who I am, right?
Yeah,
and
yeah.
I'm aware of what, here's mistakes, and let's avoid doing dumb things because, boy, is it expensive.
You said something there that just hit home for me. I had this, it's that, I don't know if drama is the right way to put it, but just I thrive in excitement and energy and new things. And I'm, Dave and I are really good partners because I love new stuff. I love getting it off the ground. I love all that. Once it comes to the maintaining it, I lose interest quickly, but he's really good at that. So we've always had this good relationship, but it just I think so many entrepreneurs I know are that way, right? We're so driven by the energy and the excitement around doing stuff. I had this conversation, not with a lot of people, but a small group of other CEOs that I get together with a couple times a year. And we were talking about, last year and COVID and everything that happened. And I say this, I can't say this to a lot of people, but it was one of the most exciting years I've ever had. All just the constant every day waking up saying, what in the heck's going to happen today? We had a lot of things happen here and just a lot of changes that we had to make. But the challenge of every day, I said it was, in a lot of ways, one of the most challenging years ever, but also, one of the most fun years I've had. And not everyone understands it, but I know, like, talking to this audience and entrepreneurs, like, yeah, it was hard, but it's also kind of fun too, because you did have that drama going on and all those things that you had to figure out. So I only share that because I said that was going to be my final before I asked you some of these lightning rounds, but I do want you to talk to this because you've been to and spoke to our advisors at events. We truly believe that the most important thing that we can do to support these advisors who are small business owners is constantly put them in the right environment to learn from others and be surrounded by that. A big part of the thing that you do, or you offer these board meetings where people are surrounded, they come together and learn from other CEOs. I know in my own life, being around other great entrepreneurs, business leaders has been valuable. Would you just maybe quickly talk to, and maybe this is even an opportunity for you to talk about the board meetings and what you do, but just how important it is for other successful or other entrepreneurs, business owners, CEOs to be in those environments where they're around like-minded people?
I think it's critical. I think, I'll say it another way. I think it's mandatory. I look at the best in the world in any endeavor. I don't care what endeavor you're talking about. I look at the best in the world, and 100% of the time, they have a coach, they have an advisor, they have a board, they have Sandy and I, my wife and I, had an opportunity to watch Tiger Woods years ago before he blew up, back when he was winning everything. And we had an opportunity to watch him on the practice range. And we were very close to him physically. And we were able to watch and hear the coaches. And Tiger had 4 coaches that were on the practice range with him. Now, this is the best player in the world. Nobody had to beg him to get out and practice. He's choosing. He has a high internal emotional need to succeed. And he's got 4 coaches. And Tiger's problem is the same problem I got, and it's the same problem you got. And that is, we can see our shots, we can't see our swing. I can't see my swing. I can only see the shot. And I could experiment and start tweaking stuff in order to change my swing, trying to guess what's wrong, but that's a pin the tail on the donkey kind of approach to getting better. Instead of me self-sabotaging by self-diagnosing, a far superior way would be to have somebody around me that said, Keith, here's what you're doing in your backswing. Here, do it this way because you're doing it that way. And if you do it this way, you'll get a better result. They can see it.
Yep.
They have optics.
That's good.
And what most of us are missing is optics. We lack optics on our businesses. We lack optics on our financials a lot of times. We don't spend the time in the cockpit of our business. And a lot of times we lack optics on what kind of pilot we are of our airplane, or what kind of decision making. A lot of we're really good at figuring out where we want to go, but we're not as good at figuring out what do I need to do to my plane in order to make the trip as successful, as efficient, as effective as we possibly can. And that's where a guide comes in. That's where a coach comes in. I think the most underrated character trait for a successful CEO is humbleness. I think you have to be humble in order to admit that you don't know, or to ask for advice. We want our employees to raise their hand and say, what can I do better? Where can I learn? But we as CEOs rarely do that. As a CEO, you need to be asking yourself 3 questions all the time. These are the 3 questions great CEOs ask. Number 1, what am I missing? Number 2, where am I wrong? Number 3, what do I need to learn? What am I missing? Where am I wrong? What do I need to learn? Well, if I have a board, if I have advisors around me, and I'm willing to be vulnerable, I'm willing to be humble, I'm willing to ask for help, I'm willing to listen, it takes courage. Mm-hmm. It's what I said before. At the root of every failure of leadership is a lack of courage. Being humble enough to say, I need help. And without it, without having a board, without having a coach, without having an advisor, I'm going to make a lot more mistakes that are going to be a whole lot more expensive than the cost of having an advisor. I'm not going to have to try to self-diagnose what the problem is. I don't have to guess what needs to happen. I've got people around me that will smell my breath and, if need be, offer me a mint. Right? I got the same problem you got, Cody. Neither one of us can smell our own breath.
Well, except for when we're wearing masks now, you know. That is, if there's one benefit of those.
That's true. That's true. So I need people around me that will smell my breath and offer me a mint if I'm headed the wrong direction. And that's what we all want. I want to become the concept is a concept that is largely lost today, and is sad. Everybody wants success. Almost nobody is prioritizing mastery. And mastery requires that you have people around you to advise you. It's mandatory. And I'm a huge fan, and I have a board that counsels me, and I have people that I work with on our board of directors, and it's exceptionally powerful.
It's, I mentioned earlier that idea of that success leaves clues, and I had Greg Brenneman on this podcast. I don't know if you met Greg before, but Greg was the CEO of Continental and turned them around, then Burger King, and we're actually both Washburn graduates, and I'd met him through there. But he said he's currently the chairman of the board for Home Depot, and he said the most successful, the best leaders he's ever met all tend to be the most humble. And he said, the one thing that I hear them say over and over, he said, is, I don't know, right? And he said, most leaders feel like when you get into that role, you're supposed to know everything, but the most successful are the ones who say, I don't know, and are willing to go seek that advice and wisdom. So just when you hear that over and over, that's a good success clue, I guess, is what everyone should be doing. So
I love that. Thanks for telling me that.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to ask you a couple quick lightning round questions. These can be, easy answers if you want them to be. I tell everyone, these are the questions that, like, when you're at our event and we're talking backstage, these are the types of questions that I'm asking you one-on-one. So I'm asking them, on the behalf of everyone that will listen to this too. So I got 5 quick ones for you. First one, what lesson or lessons maybe did you learn in 2020 as we went through this pandemic that you will carry forward for the rest of your career life? Maybe something that was different or a new moment that you learned.
I got reminded that suffering can only happen when I argue with reality. I saw a lot of people, even today, arguing with either the politics or the health advice, and everybody has got a position and a way of thinking about it. There is a different way to think about it, which is, what's reality? And my job as a business owner is to deal with the reality I've been dealt. And I can argue with it all I want, but the reality is I got a job to do as a business owner, and that is take care of my business. What's the reality that I'm dealing with? I got reminded of the importance of dry powder and a safety net, that stuff can happen a lot faster than I realize. I wasn't expecting this one, and I had no idea when it started what the severity of it was going to be. And I'm grateful that we were well positioned personally and with our businesses so that we could withstand a hurricane. It's just a great, great reminder.
That's good. That powder dry, we have a whole thing that we do with our advisors on keeping powder dry, and that's a benefit of being around you and learning that lesson. So, okay, so you look back over your storied career, what was the one thing that you did, just one thing, that took you from being a good business owner to being a great business owner?
That one's easy. Prioritizing the people and the culture over everything else.
Great answer. What are you doing this year to drive your own personal growth that you're excited about? Is there something new, something that you're really focused on?
I read 2 to 3 books a week and have for 35 years. I am a committed learner. If somebody asked me to spell growth, I would spell it Learn. I am in a never-ending process of figuring out what's the new stuff I need to learn. I don't have a particular focus this year other than I have a library. The books you see behind me, a lot of those are unread. So I tend to my library typically consists of unread books. Once I've read them, now I don't keep them, but my library is unread ones. So I've got a huge list this year that I'm going to continue to pursue, but no specific one thing.
Well, it's a great transition to my fourth question. Being a reader myself, I always ask this question, but okay, let me preface this. It can't be one of your books, okay? But what is the one book that you would recommend most or have recommended most to other entrepreneurs, leaders, business owners? There's
a book called Good Strategy, Bad Strategy by a guy named Rumelt, Rumelt. Good Strategy, Bad Strategy. Anything that Howard Marks writes. Howard Marks is the author. his book is called The Most Important Thing. And for you and your advisors, that book, it could be very, very valuable. Just a brief on that one.
Yeah.
Warren Buffett has said that Howard Marks is the only guy that Warren will stop what he's doing to read what Howard Marks has to say. Howard Marks is old. He's rich. He made his money in the markets. He's a contemporary. He runs something called Oak Tree, which I'm sure you guys are familiar with.
Yeah.
And he is one of the best thinkers and writers on business and investing that has ever lived.
Great advice. Those are two new books I haven't heard people mention before. So, okay, final question. What is the best piece of advice that you've ever received?
Hell on earth would be to meet the man I could have been.
Oh, that's good. Love it. All right, buddy. I appreciate you, Keith. It's always great spending time with you. I've learned so much from you over the years. Thankful for Tony for introducing us at that first Business Mastery. And as you stood up there and I listened to you, I don't know, you spoke for I spoke for an hour or two. You spoke for 2 or 3 days at that thing. But you've been so valuable for us, I know personally, and so many of our advisors that have worked with you. Let me ask this final question. Obviously, everyone should go buy this book, The Road Less Stupid. It's I can't even show you you can't really see them, all the notes that I've taken out of that. But what are some other ways that people can connect with you if they want to learn more from you?
Thank you. Probably the best way, and certainly the most current way, I teach a course one time a year called the 4-Day MBA. It's coming up September 24th through the 27th. It will be hybrid. Some people will be live. Some people will be joining on Zoom. We've had several of our courses run that way very effectively. The 4-Day MBA answers the most common question I get when I speak around the world, and that question is, Keith, how do I grow my business and make more money? And unless you're going to Wall Street to work for Goldman Sachs, the whole point of getting an MBA is to understand the answers to those questions. How do I grow it? How do I make more money? So I spend 4 days live in class. I'm the only teacher. And if you have an interest in learning what I know about running a business and transitioning from operator to owner, which is really what the core of the business is about, the core of the course is about. If that's a skill set you'd like, then the 4-Day MBA, you can contact us at info@keystothevault.com. info@keystothevault.com. And we'd be happy to set you up. It will sell out, so and it's happening in roughly 3 weeks. But that would be the most imminent way for somebody to engage.
And we'll go link all that in the show notes too. So if people listen, we'll get all your contact info because I know so many people have talked about how big of an impact that's had on them. So for everyone that listens to this episode, if you enjoyed it, go leave a review, let other people know it's a valuable use of their time, but make sure you subscribe also so you can hear from other thought leaders like Keith as I get an opportunity to spend some time with him. So Keith, my friend, again, as always, appreciate you, appreciate everything you stand for and the value that you provide.
I appreciate you, Cody, and I appreciate the opportunity you've given me to do this work. You have a great organization with unbelievably engaged members, and it's very, very impressive. So I appreciate the opportunity, and I appreciate you.
Thank you.
Thank you.